I recently started playing the Elder Scrolls Online. I got to level 50, I started the champion point grind, I customized some spells, I found some things that I enjoyed and some things that I definitely did not. And with the latest expansion, the Gold Road, having recently released, I thought now would be the time to try and answer the question, is the Elder Scrolls Online worth playing in 2024? You start, as most MMOs do, with the character creator. It's like playing God for a little bit, but instead of creating the universe, you're deciding if your elf should have a beard or not. You've got 10 races, each with slightly different racial abilities, and if you're aiming to be competitive, you'll probably want to research the best combos. You can also pick your faction, which is mostly just the side you want to play in PvP. If you're up to date with the expansions, there are 7 classes to pick from. The game does have the Holy Trinity, there are tanks, DPS and healers. When you get into the game, you do get a little tutorial that shows you the combat basics. And at the end of it, you get to pick your content. You can go with any story that has come out since its launch. So you can do the original story or any of the expansions. You can pick the world is your oyster. For my playthrough, I did go with the original story to sort of try and set the scene for myself. But we do need to talk about the elephant in the room. And like a Taylor Swift concert, it's actually pretty massive and unavoidable. And that is the combat. On the surface, I should really like the combat. It's sort of this action mode from other MMOs that aren't really fully action based, but try to mimic it. You can left click to attack, you can hold to do a heavy, you can block, you can dodge, you can interrupt, and probably more that, I'm just forgetting. It's not possible though to switch targets with tab. What it does is that it takes your mouse movements as the aim. Unlike tab target games where your cursor is free and you literally just click or press tab to select your enemies. Here, you sort of need to aim, but thankfully if your aim is as bad as mine, the game will just hit the closest target. You won't miss unless you really, really miss. And I have to say, I also enjoy the enemy attacks. Yes, sometimes it's just a tank and spank, but often they're doing AoEs and interesting abilities that you either want to interrupt or just dodge out of the way. In theory, I should love it. In practice, I don't. And that's actually nothing to do with the infamous attack weaving. Now, I'm probably going to badly explain this, but I believe originally it was a bug that let you do some animation cancels. And as far as I can tell, the most common use for this was to basically animation cancel your left click to attack and then immediately do an ability. You wouldn't see the animation for the left click and the ability would cast as normal, effectively doing 2 lots of damage almost at the same time, one immediately after the other. That bug, basically, as far as I know, couldn't be got rid of, so they made it an integral part of the combat. And well, people have mixed feelings on that, I think that's fair to say. I sort of like it. I thought I would hate that part, but I think if you removed it, the combat would ultimately feel a little bit less engaging. In general though, I think most animation cancels are typically dumb and often not actually intended. They do increase the skill needed in the game, and without this one, I think the combat would feel a little bit weird. Suffice to say, attack weaving in Elder Scrolls Online is controversial, and if you don't like it, you will probably not like the combat. Overall, I think ESO is in a little bit of a strange place. It's sort of like a true hybrid. It's neither really tab target, and it's neither action combat. It really is in a unique place that most games haven't replicated. I think conceptually, it's probably one of the best compromise solutions available, but in reality, it never really feels great. The movement and combat to me feel floaty. Nothing really seems like it has any impact. The counter to this argument of it feeling a little bit floaty though, is that it does sort of feel smooth. People might know that I'm a bit of a New World Andy, and I think New World has great combat, but a lot of people find that combat to be clunky and a little bit too weighty. ESO, I would say, feels a lot smoother than New World though in that sense. But of course, it does come at the cost of the impact of that combat feel. Combat feels like a wet noodle. There's motion, but it lacks weight. Overall, for the combat, you're either going to like it or you don't like it. It's a divisive issue, hard to explain, you sort of need to feel it. A couple of the systems in Elder Scrolls Online can feel a little bit overwhelming at first, and I think the skill system is one that definitely has that potential for you. Your class will provide you with 3 core skill trees, but there are additional skills and ability tied to your weapons, the in-game guilds like Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, your armor type, and much more. And it's important to balance these skills to maximize your character's true potential. For beginners though, if you're unsure what to upgrade, there is an automated suggestion button that will help guide you through. Though again, I'm not sure how competitive that would make you, but you'll definitely be able to complete most of the content just following that, I'm sure. The skill leveling in Elder Scrolls Online operates in 2 fronts. First, you have the overall skill category leveling, and then there's the individual spell leveling. As spells level up, you can often enhance and morph these spells, usually opting for a version that best aligns with the resources that you're focusing on, which for most people you'll either be a stamina XYZ or a magicka XYZ. That means you then stack that resource and you build around it with your gear and all that kind of stuff. You also need to unlock abilities using skill points that you get as you level, but you can also find in the open world. This whole system I think can be a little bit confusing at first, but it is going to be key to how you manage your class playstyle. Unlike other MMOs, skills in ESO don't really have typical cooldowns. Instead, you can sort of recast them when you want multiple times, making the resource management essential to your effectiveness in combat. And when it comes to armor, you have 3 types to choose from. You can go light, medium, or heavy. I was told whilst I was leveling that it was recommended to equip at least 1 piece of each type to ensure that you level up the category of each armor type. In the skill category of each armor type, you can then unlock passives. These passives will give you benefits depending on the amount of armor you're wearing of that type. To be honest, there's way more depth here than I can realistically talk about without either boring you or being wrong. And it seems that more depth gets added over time. The recent expansion, the Gold Road, for example, just added skill scribing. Scribing is a journey into the heart of the undiscovered magic that lets you acquire and create all new custom skills for your characters. You can craft your own skills basically. There's quite simply just a lot that makes up your character, and you have the freedom to pick and choose what you like. Okay, let's talk about the actual gameplay. You can pick any zone, as I said at the start, for you to start your adventure in the land of the Elder Scrolls. And what's interesting is the entire world will scale with you. So if you want, you can start with the original base game zone like I did, or you can jump into any of the new ones. Maybe you want to start in the recently added Westworld, or maybe you want to go to wherever Necrom was set. You can go and start anywhere. And what's interesting, you can actually still play with others as well as you do this, even if they're different levels, because it looks like the game has some kind of like percentage damage. So theoretically, a max level 50 could play with a level 1 and still have a fun fair time, getting rewards that are level appropriate. Now this is great in the sense that you can always do the content, but for me it takes away that RPG feeling of growing stronger. I want to feel like a real Chad, getting juicier, beefier, steroided up, and just dominating some unsuspecting little monsters. But with scaling you don't really feel that. Rarely for me whilst I was playing ESO did I feel like I was actually getting stronger and really progressing, which for me was quite a big turn-off, to be honest. I've always been a little bit torn on scaling, leaning into the side that I don't really like it, because I understand that if you don't have scaling, it means you have irrelevant content once you've gone past it. Scaling in ESO ensures that all the content remains relevant, but it also means that the sense of progression can feel muted. For me, it sort of works in ESO because ESO focuses more on the storytelling rather than on vertical progression. However, for others, it might leave you feeling a little bit underwhelmed. As I said, I started with the original story, pretty much just so I could understand what the hell was going on. Now, I'm not normally a lore guy, and Elder Scrolls is all about story, and I think if you like story, you're not going to be disappointed here. I'm not going to spoil any of the story of Mini Marco and Molag Ballsack, but everything is well voice acted. The original story has an all-star lineup with John Cleese, Michael Gambon, and probably many others that I just didn't recognize. I definitely did sometimes find the lines a little bit corny. At once we must embrace the light of the 5 before the perished ones have descended and the moon melds shimmers. That's not lines from the game, but that's how it sounds to me. I would say that as you go through the stories though, they have some great set pieces and some nice visuals. I did sort of occasionally find the gameplay a little bit repetitive. Often you just started at one end of the room, did a little bit of a puzzle, and then got to the other side of the room. I would say overall though, the story was consistent and delivered with quality. If you're someone out there looking for an MMO with a fantastic story, then I don't think you could go very wrong with Elder Scrolls Online. The world is rich and deeply explorable. There is rich lore everywhere, references to other Elder Scrolls games, hidden skill points, Easter eggs, funny moments, and much more. There are zone delves, which are basically non-personal instance dungeons. You can think of these as dungeons sort of like Skyrim, but there's other people there. Every zone is teeming with quests and things to do, and each zone actually has its own story quest chain. Elder Scrolls Online really is a lore enjoyer's paradise. If you like stories in your MMOs, or you just like Elder Scrolls games, then ESO I think should be on your list to play it. And this game is actually being supported, right? The game's had several expansions, and I think there's been 2 in 2 years at this point. We had the Gold Road this year, and I think Necrom was last year. It's a very well supported game, even though it's recently had its 10-year anniversary. They're not letting this one die just yet. Okay, let's be honest. Elder Scrolls Online looks a little bit dated. I'm not sure it was ever very pretty when it came out, but some of the textures and the graphics right now are honestly not looking that amazing. Some of the newer zones obviously have been improved, they're a little bit more vibrant and saturated, but I would never really call the game beautiful. Now as you play, when you hit level 10, you will get access to some PvP battlegrounds and the dungeon finder. And you will sort of want to do these once per day, as there is a daily bonus XP attached to these. If you do the PvP early on when you don't have any real skills and you don't really know what you're doing, then you might struggle a little bit. But for me, the PvP was probably the most fun I had in ESO. The battlegrounds are sort of 4v4v4, and there's a few different modes. All of them quite fun. One issue that I might have is that I'm not sure there's any matchmaking. There's definitely no ranked arena or battlegrounds as far as I can tell, but the matchmaking for the PvP I think could literally just be all over the place. I don't know how it works. There is also an automatic dungeon group finder, which is fun and quick. Much quicker if you play a tank or a healer though. But sadly with the dungeons, you sort of just speed run through them. You absolutely blitz it and you don't really have any time to take in the scenery at all. Each dungeon though does have a quest that you can follow along if you want even more story. Obviously, all of this scales to whatever level you are, even though the members in your party can be any level, and you will get gear appropriate to the level that you are. So in that sense, definitely worth doing. There are a couple of things that I really didn't like in the game. One of them was the system for improving your mount. And you do that by going to the stable master. And it's literally a time lock thing that you buy. So let's say you want to increase your speed. Well, once a day you go to the stable and you buy 1% increase. This time-gated mess I find truly awful. Sure, there's occasionally scrolls that can help with that. I think technically you can maybe get some in the crown store with the gems or what have you. But this system feels like it should have been removed, but they probably haven't removed it because everybody who's already done it would be annoyed, which I think is a bad excuse. It adds very little. There's no role playing to it really. It's dog crap, and it's not even shared across your entire account, which I think is dumb. I'm also not overly keen on the UI. The UI is obviously very Elder Scrolls, very Skyrim, but I'm not sure it fully works in an MMO. And I'm not sure it works particularly when you're questing. One quest at any given time can be effectively tracked, and for me, finding the location you were supposed to go was a little bit confusing and not very easy. The best way that we discovered was that you could go in your journal, find the quest that you wanted to complete, and then press M. That would then show you, and then you could zoom out knowing-ish where that would be on the map. There was another issue when I was doing one quest, and then I would go over to another quest giver and take their quest. The quest that I was currently on would become not the tracked quest anymore. It would be replaced with the one that I just picked up. There might be a setting to turn that off somewhere, but for a little while, that confused the hell out of me. We also need to talk about ESO Plus and the monetization. So you can pick up the base game of Elder Scrolls Online relatively cheaply. I think right now it's maybe around about $15 at the time of recording. Or you can buy the deluxe version of the latest expansion, and it gives you all of the previous expansions and the base game. On top of that, there is an optional sub called ESO Plus, which if you have any version of the game, it gives you all of the expansions except the latest expansion. And this sub will obviously give you some benefits as well, which pretty much most people will call a requirement when it comes to ESO. You get unlimited storage for your crafting mats, you get some crowns, you get double bank space, you get an increase to your gold and experience. And one of the main ones that a lot of people will call out is simply the storage, and the crafting storage particularly. Most people, as far as I know, will admit that of course it is optional theoretically. In practice, the game is sort of trying to force you to buy it. Some people will hate this, and some people will see it as a better version of an actual normal sub, because people who can't afford it don't have to buy it. I think I'm somewhere in the middle on that one. Now, I think there are also effectively loot boxes for skins in this game with those crowns that I mentioned. I never really touched this system because I actually like to keep my money. But overall, I'd say I'm not a fan of loot boxes, even if it's just for skins. I think loot boxes are basically gambling and should be treated as much. So I'm not going to go off on a tirade because quite frankly, I don't know what I'm talking about. I also didn't really touch the crafting very much, simply because it never really felt that relevant to me. But there was this system where you sort of deconstructed your items to learn the traits. And each time you do that, it takes longer. And I'm talking hours, I'm not talking like in-game, I'm talking 5 hours IRL, 10 hours, etc. So the more you learn, the slower that it is to learn the next one, which feels a little bit backwards to me. And it sort of means I think you can mess up trying to get traits that aren't good when you're a beginner. Again, I understand that this is progression, but it sort of feels like unfun progression to me. Now, I didn't really touch crafting, mostly because I didn't want to, but also because the dungeon sort of gave me gear, and as I was leveling up and getting my champion points, there just didn't seem to be any need. Now, I just mentioned champion points. When you get to the max level of the game, which is level 50, you then realize that you're not actually at the end game proper. There is then another system called champion points, and whilst these champion points are not necessarily the same number of XP as leveling, they are effectively extra levels that you need to do after being level 50, if that makes sense. And when it comes to gear, only when you get to 160 champion points are you really at the max cap for gearing. But it doesn't stop there, because every level you get to spend it in the champion point tree, which is basically like a talent tree. And I'm not 100% sure if the points there are capped. It's not a system that I fully understand. But what I would say is that it made getting to level 50 sort of quite underwhelming. It was originally the goal, and then the goalposts sort of feel like they got moved. Anything before champion point 160 sort of feels a little bit pointless. All of the gear that you're going to get, you're going to replace with a higher champion point version of it, because the champion points effectively instruct what level your drops will be. One good thing about that is though, your champion points are shared across your entire account. So if you have multiple alts, then you only need to do this once. Now, I don't think ESO has any vertical progression, or not strict vertical progression. In theory, the gear that you got 5 years ago could very easily be relevant now. In reality, the meta changes and new items will get added, but conceptually, those new items will be a similar level. In practice, you'll probably want them as they'll be more suited to your build and become the meta. But I think not having an endless treadmill for gear is something that appeals to a lot of people. A lot of people got bored of the gear chase in some games like World of Warcraft. Horizontal progression for a lot of people is just much more casual friendly, and more engaging for some. It can make others though feel a little bit bored that there's nothing to chase. Though for me, it looks like ESO is definitely the kind of game that you can take breaks from and then simply come back when there's new content and something you really want to do. And there'll be a lot of content when you do that, especially if you've got a new expansion to explore. Let's be honest, ESO has content, like a lot of content. There's all the old expansions, but there's just stuff to do. I know, completely wild for somebody who enjoys New World, but there is a lot of content. There's absolutely loads of dungeons you can do, loads of the delves you can do, loads of zone quests you can do. There's a lot of battleground PvP you can do. There's an endless tower mode basically. There's the scribing and many other professions. There's a card game. There's 12-person raids. And there's the various different faction PvP modes like Cyrodiil and the Imperial City. Most of that content you can effectively play while solo, with the exception of raids and probably good quality faction PvP. For those, I think it's better to get a group, and in ESO you can actually join multiple guilds. Maybe you can join a guild that will just do raiding, maybe you can join a guild that will just do the PvP, like Cyrodiil. There are party boards, which some people do grinding the raids, but I think ultimately you're better joining a guild here. The organization will just be better. The content amount is simply staggering. In summary, Elder Scrolls Online is a rich, story-driven MMO. There's a vast world to explore and a wealth of content to keep you engaged. There are a couple of drawbacks depending on what you like. I personally not a huge fan of the combat. The visuals are a little bit dated. I don't really like the UI, but it does have a massive strength, and that is the storytelling and indeed the diverse content offerings. If you've never tried Elder Scrolls Online before, you definitely should, and if you're thinking about coming back, you'll know what you're going to get. High quality, story driven content. Give it another go. For now, I hope you have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.